I should have known the night would sting the moment I walked into the lodge lobby, with snow still clinging to the cuffs of my winter boots and the small pine tree cradled in my arms. It wasn't heavy, just modest. A 24-inch Douglas fir, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. I thought it looked sweet. Personal. Meaningful. Tobias didn't agree. He spotted me from across the room the way men like him always do. Eyes narrowed, lips tilting just enough to announce he'd found his next target. The fireplace behind him glowed against the stone wall, throwing warm amber light over the velvet ribbons, crystal garlands, and the massive 12-foot lodge tree towering near the staircase. The whole place smelled like pine and cinnamon-infused champagne. It was beautiful. And somehow, he still chose me. He stepped closer, tugging at his tailored charcoal coat. "That's your tree?" he asked, voice dipped in amusement. "Cute. Very budget Christmas." A few nearby guests chuckled. Quiet, but loud enough. My fingers tightened around the trunk. I kept my expression smooth, the same way I've done for years when people see what they want to see. Just a woman. Just a guest. Just someone who doesn't fit. Inside, the heat crawled up my throat. Outside, the snow kept falling behind the tall windows like silent approval. I placed my tree near the check-in counter. Its needles shimmered in the soft golden lighting. I thought it looked charming, like a quiet secret waiting to bloom. Tobias didn't stop. "You know," he continued, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve, "some people bring ornaments. Or, actual trees." Someone laughed again. A woman in sequins, holding a flute of champagne. Her eyes skimmed over me like I was a misplaced decoration. I inhaled slowly, the scent of cedar and winter roses settling me back into my body. For a moment, I wanted to defend myself. To say something soft but honest, like, "It's not the size of the tree that matters, it's the meaning." But then the piano started. Soft, slow notes drifting from the lounge, echoing off the marble floors. The sound reminded me who I was. What belonged to me. What all of them were standing inside. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. "I like small things," I said simply. Then I gave him a polite smile, one of those quiet, contained smiles that people mistake for timidity. It wasn't timidity. It was patience. "Of course you do," Tobias replied, sipping his drink. "Some budgets don't stretch." The words should have burned. Instead, they settled like frost. Thin. Predictable. Harmless. Because he didn't know what I knew. He didn't know that the velvet ribbon draped along the staircase was chosen by me, or that the marble beneath his overpriced shoes was installed after I signed the check, or that the crackling logs in the fireplace were stacked yesterday morning by a staff member who had whispered, "Good evening, Miss Grant," when I came through the private entrance. He didn't know the pine-scented candles were from my personal brand. He didn't know the lodge's winter festival, this very party, was a signature event under my portfolio. He didn't know anything, and I was in no hurry to correct him. I lifted my tree again and headed to the far corner of the room, letting the warm glow wash across my pearl earrings. Tobias watched me walk away. I felt his gaze snag on the sway of my winter cape, the soft white wool brushing against the polished wooden floors. I didn't look back. Not yet. But I would. And when I did, he wouldn't be laughing. Before I placed the tree down, I glanced at the camera, your camera, and breathed in. Have you ever been judged before people even knew your story? Tell me where you're watching from. The morning after the party always feels different at the lodge. Quieter. Softer. As if the snow itself has agreed to pause. I woke to the sound of distant piano chords drifting up from the lobby, the musician rehearsing before breakfast. The notes floated through the hallways, brushing against the silk curtains of my suite like a gentle invitation. Light snowfall dusted the balcony railings outside, turning the world into a watercolor painting of white and gold. I wrapped myself in a cream cashmere robe, the fabric warm against my skin, and stepped onto the balcony. The cold air kissed my face. Below me, the lodge courtyard glittered with frost. Staff moved with practiced grace, setting up lanterns, checking wreaths, brushing snow from the marble steps. They didn't see me yet. I like moments like these. Watching them work. Watching the place breathe. Because the lodge wasn't just a business. It was mine, built from the ground up, brick by brick, investment by investment, owned quietly through a web of trusts and holding companies no one ever cared to look into. I slipped back inside and dressed slowly. Soft beige turtleneck, tailored winter trousers, a single strand of pearls resting against my collarbone. Not loud, not flashy, just quietly expensive the way I preferred. When I stepped into the hallway, the morning manager spotted me instantly. "Good morning, Ms. Grant," he said with a respectful nod. "Your usual table in the lounge?" Yes, I smiled. "Thank you." He hurried ahead to prepare it. I didn't rush. My heels clicked softly against the polished wooden floor, echoing through the corridor with a confidence I didn't need to announce. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed lightly. Guests in festive sweaters took photos near the massive tree. A couple argued over whether the cocoa needed more marshmallows. Someone played with the gold tassels on the velvet stockings hung by the fireplace. And then a familiar voice. Tobias. He was seated near the window, laughing with two men I vaguely recognized from the night before. He didn't see me yet. His back was turned, but I could hear every word. His tone always carried just enough arrogance to fill a room. "Did you see her tree?" he said. "It looked like something from a dollar bin." I swear, some people don't understand the vibe of this place. One of the men chuckled. "Maybe she can't afford the big one." Tobias scoffed. "In this lodge? Doubt it. They charge more for a suite here than some people make in a month." My suite, I thought. My lodge. My prices. I walked past them without a sound. Not because their words mattered, but because silence is its own form of power. As I entered the breakfast lounge, the piano melody softened. The manager hurried over to pull out my chair and place a linen napkin across my lap. I murmured a thank you, and he gave a small bow before stepping away. From the corner of my eye, I saw Tobias freeze. He hadn't expected staff to treat me that way. He hadn't expected anyone to know my name. His friend whispered, "Wait, who is she?" Tobias shrugged. "Probably some VIP guest. These places always have a few." I stirred my tea slowly, jasmine with a hint of honey. The steam curled upward like a secret slipping into the air. He still didn't know. Not about the lodge. Not about the land. Not about the end-of-year board meeting that would be held right here in 3 days. Not about the signature he'd eventually see on every document posted to the lobby bulletin. The signature he mocked last night without ever knowing it belonged to the owner. I sipped my tea and let the warmth settle in my chest. Calm. Grounded. Patient. Tobias was still talking behind me, still certain of his place in the room. He had no idea the ground he stood on, quite literally, was about to shift. The afternoon brought more snow, soft, drifting flakes that made the lodge look like a holiday postcard. Guests stepped outside to take pictures, booths sinking lightly into the powder, their laughter echoing across the courtyard. From the balcony hallway, I watched them through the tall glass windows, feeling the familiar calm of winter settle around me. By 4 o'clock, the lobby was glowing. Candlelight shimmered on the marble floors. The velvet garlands above the fireplace caught the warm gold of the chandeliers, and the pianist shifted into a slow, elegant rendition of Silent Night. Everything felt serene. Too serene. That's usually when humiliation arrives, wrapped neatly in someone else's confidence. I descended the staircase, fingertips brushing the smooth wooden rail, pearls lightly tapping against my collarbone. I planned to review the evening schedule with the front desk manager before heading to the office wing. Simple. Quiet. Until Tobias' voice cut through the room. Loud. Too loud. Performative loud. "Look who's here," he announced. I didn't turn immediately. I stood still, letting the warmth of the fireplace settle against my back. I knew the tone, mockery disguised as humor, meant to entertain whoever he thought was watching. He stepped closer, blocking part of the chandelier's reflection on the floor. "Dahlia, right?" he said. "The girl with the tiny Christmas tree?" A few heads turned. I gave a small polite nod. "That's me." He grinned as if he'd won something. "You know, we were just talking about you." I told them your tree looked like the kind you stick on top of a desk in a dorm room. His friends snickered. I inhaled slowly, the scent of pine and warm cinnamon drifting from the lounge. A couple nearby pretended not to listen, pretended poorly. Tobias leaned in, lowering his voice but not enough. You really should look around before bringing anything embarrassing here. This place is upscale. He gestured broadly at the decor. Not everyone can blend in. I remained still. Stillness was always my power. But he mistook it. Of course he did. He chuckled. You okay? You look uncomfortable. His eyes slid over my clothes, subtle mockery dripping from his expression. It's fine. Not everyone gets the vibe of a luxury lodge. I felt several guests watching us now. Some had seen him at last night's party. Some probably knew exactly what kind of man he was. But humiliation works best when it has an audience. He snapped his fingers toward the bar. Hey, maybe she needs one of those complimentary hot cocos. The cheap kind. He smirked. It'll match her tree. The pianist hit a wrong note. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The front desk manager stiffened behind the counter, eyes flicking nervously between us. He wasn't sure if stepping in would ruin something. I kept my voice low. I'm fine, thank you. Tobias wasn't satisfied. Men like him never were. Good, he said, clapping once. Because the VIPs are arriving soon. Real money. You might want to... I don't know. He waved his hand vaguely. Stay out of the way. More laughter from his table. My throat warmed, not from embarrassment, but from restraint. It's always the restraint that burns first. He stepped aside, giving a casual little bow. Enjoy the view, Dahlia. Maybe next year you can upgrade your tree. And that was it. He walked away, satisfied with himself. But as he rejoined his friends, one of them asked, You sure you should talk to guests like that? Guest. Tobias scoffed. Please. She's nobody. Nobody. I smoothed a hand over the front of my winter coat, letting the fabric steady me. I glanced once at the glass windows, at the reflection of a woman who looked composed, serene, untouched. He had no idea. The lodge wasn't just where I stayed. It was where he'd just humiliated the owner. I didn't answer Tobias. I simply walked toward the lounge, letting the murmur of conversation fade behind me. The snow outside had thickened, drifting in slow, hypnotic patterns against the tall glass windows. Candlelight flickered across the marble floors, and the pianist eased into a softer melody, something almost mournful. I chose a small table near the fireplace. Velvet seats. Low golden light. A moment to breathe. The humiliation hadn't pierced my pride. It had pierced something quieter. Something more fragile. The part of me that still remembered being underestimated long before I owned a single piece of real estate. A server approached with a gentle smile. Miss Grant? Would you like your usual champagne? Her voice was soft, sympathetic. I shook my head. Tea tonight. Jasmine. Of course. She bowed her head slightly and hurried away. A couple across the lounge whispered. She handled that so well. I would have slapped him. That man is awful. Their words drifted through the air like falling ash, light, almost weightless, but impossible to ignore. Still, I kept my expression calm. Always calm. My tea arrived in a delicate porcelain cup. The steam curled upward, fragrant and steady. I cupped it between my hands, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. The lodge staff avoided looking too directly at me, loyal, protective, but unsure whether I wanted comfort. They knew who I was. They knew what power truly lived in this building. But they also knew I preferred subtlety over spectacle. The front desk manager approached slowly, hesitating behind my chair. Ms. Grant. Yes. About earlier, he swallowed. I apologize for what you had to experience. We usually handle incidents like that immediately, but you seemed composed. I offered. He nodded. Yes. That's because I was. I took a sip of tea, letting the jasmine settle on my tongue. Don't reprimand him. Not yet. He exhaled, relieved, yet conflicted. Of course. He left quietly, and I returned to my thoughts. Tobias had no idea how many people in this room answered to me. How many decisions I'd made within these walls. How deeply my legacy was stitched into the architecture, the lighting, even the menu. He saw a woman with a small Christmas tree and assumed a small life. A mistake people like him made often. As I sat there, watching the flames dance behind the glass fireplace screen, an idea formed, quiet, elegant, inevitable. Not revenge. Not pettiness. Just correction. A gentle rearranging of perspectives. My phone buzzed lightly. A calendar notification. End of year owners meeting, 2 days. Location, Grand Hall, Northern Wing. Attendance mandatory. Mandatory. For everyone with decision-making power. Including the general manager, the financial director, and the new development lead, Tobias. Of course he'd bragged about the VIPs arriving soon. He thought he was part of them. He thought he was climbing the ladder. He had no idea the ladder belonged to me. I shut off the notification. One of his friends passed by on the way to the restroom. When he saw me sitting alone, he paused awkwardly. Hey, sorry about earlier, he muttered. Toby can be loud. I lifted my eyes to him. Calm. Steady. Loudness is rarely the problem, I said softly. It's what people choose to say with it. He nodded, embarrassed, and disappeared quickly. I leaned back in my chair, the velvet cushions molding comfortably beneath me. My reflection glimmered faintly in the glass cabinet of champagne bottles across the room. A woman alone. Serene. Unbothered. But inside, something had shifted. A plan. A quiet, elegant unveiling. Not tonight. Soon. When the snow settled. When the room was full. When the moment was ripe for silence to do what words never could. The first real shift happened the next morning. Quietly, almost invisibly, the way snow begins to melt under a slow winter sun. I woke before dawn. The room dim except for the amber glow of the fireplace. My suite always felt like a sanctuary. Velvet throws draped across the sofa, marble accents catching the early light, the faint scent of sandalwood lingering from last night's turn-down service. I dressed with deliberate calm, soft cream sweater, tailored slacks, a delicate gold watch that used to belong to my father. A silent symbol of legacy, one Tobias would never recognize, even if it sat 2 inches from his face. Downstairs, the lodge was preparing for its busiest weekend yet. Staff moved briskly, reeds in hand, trays of crystal glassware gleaming beneath chandeliers. I noticed the shift in atmosphere immediately. Everyone was sharper, more alert. The end-of-year VIP arrivals always had that effect. And Tobias? He had stationed himself by the grand fireplace, surrounded by a new group of guests, arms folded like he owned the place. I could hear his voice from across the lobby, loud, confident, dripping with certainty that the universe adored him. He didn't see me at first. But I saw him. And I saw exactly what was about to happen. The general manager, Mr. Howell, spotted me from across the room. His expression changed instantly. He straightened, excused himself from a conversation with 2 investors, and walked toward me with a small leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Good morning, Ms. Grant, he said, lowering his voice respectfully. I have the updated figures for the weekend occupancy. The board asked if you'd like to review them before the noon briefing. A few heads turned, including Tobias's. He blinked twice, confused. Why was the manager speaking to the woman with the tiny budget tree? I nodded politely. You can leave them at the desk, thank you. Of course. Another slight bow. Another pair of eyes widening from across the lobby. Tobias's friend whispered, she must be someone. Tobias forced a laugh. Relax. Staff here treats everyone like royalty. That's why it's overpriced. Interesting. He was starting to feel the shift, but instead of questioning himself, he clung to arrogance like a lifeline. I walked toward the lounge, the soft clink of porcelain echoing around me as breakfast service began. The pianist gently rehearsed a holiday melody, fingers gliding across ivory keys. I paused for a moment, letting the notes wash over me. From the corner of my eye, I saw Tobias follow me with his gaze. Not out of admiration. Out of confusion. The first clue. Ignored completely. Later that morning, I stepped outside to check the new ice sculpture installation on the terrace. Snowflakes drifted softly around me, melting against my wool coat. A young staff member, new to the team, hurried over with a clipboard. Ms. Grant, the delivery invoices are ready for your signature, she said. The vendors are waiting. My title, said out loud, clear as glass. And there was Tobias, standing just a few feet away, helping his friends take photos by the fire pit. His head snapped toward me. His smile faltered. But then, predictably, he convinced himself he'd misheard. He even shook his head slightly, like brushing off an unwelcome thought. Another clue, left at his feet. Another clue he stepped over like snow on a path he didn't know he was walking. I signed the invoices with deliberate grace, the wind lifting strands of my hair. The vendors bowed slightly before stepping aside. A few guests stared with curiosity. Tobias shoved his hands into his pockets, jaw tightening. He didn't understand why people treated me differently. Why the staff moved around me instead of asking me to move. Why my presence shifted the temperature of the entire terrace. But instead of asking, instead of thinking, he simply scoffed and walked away. The clues were there, bright as sunlight on marble. He just refused to see them. By Saturday evening, the lodge had shifted into full holiday elegance. The chandeliers glowed warmer, casting soft gold halos across the marble floors. The scent of mulled wine drifted from the bar. Staff glided through the lobby carrying silver trays topped with crystal flutes, the faint chime of glass weaving through the room like music. I didn't plan to cross paths with Tobias again. But fate, or irony, had its own sense of timing. I stepped into the grand hall wearing a deep green velvet dress, the fabric pulled around my ankles like quiet wealth. A small pearl pin rested in my hair. Nothing loud. Nothing screaming for attention. But in a room like this, quiet things shine the brightest. And Tobias noticed. He was standing near the fireplace with the same group as before. His laughter evaporated mid-sentence when he saw me walk in. For the first time, he didn't mock. He stared. Because something felt off to him. Familiar enough to respect. Confusing enough to unsettle. He didn't understand why my presence shifted the mood around him. I took a seat near the large window overlooking the snowy courtyard. Outside, the lanterns flickered against the storm, and the reflection of the falling snow looked like confetti caught in a spotlight. Moments later, Mr. Howell hurried toward me again, breath forming small clouds in the cool hallway air. "Miss Grant," he said, lowering his voice. "The early board arrival is here. They're waiting in the West Lounge. Shall I bring refreshments?" "Please," I nodded. "I'll join them in 5. Tobias heard it. Every word. His head snapped toward me like a magnet hitting metal. "Bored? Here? At a lodge he thought he understood?" His friend whispered, "Dude, she's on a board?" "I don't know," Tobias muttered. "Maybe she volunteers for something." His voice was strained, trying to rationalize. But even he heard the respect dripping from Howell's tone. He couldn't ignore that part. I made my way toward the West Lounge. My heels clicked softly against the marble, echoing with calm authority. Tobias watched every step, eyes following me with the tension of someone who is finally, reluctantly, realizing they might not know everything. As I approached the double doors, 2 staff members straightened and opened them simultaneously, without me having to say a word. Inside, the fireplace crackled softly, and a low hum of conversation floated beneath the piano melody from the main hall. A few board members rose when they saw me. "Dahlia," one of them Thomas, said warmly. "We're ahead of schedule, but we figured you'd want the occupancy numbers before tonight's event." I shook his hand, then took the seat at the head of the long mahogany table. Deliberate. Silent. Powerful. The staff placed a tray of champagne flutes beside me, the crystal catching the firelight with every movement. And Tobias saw all of it. Because he followed us. Not close enough to join. Close enough to watch. He lingered outside the lounge door, pretending to examine a painting on the wall. But his eyes kept flicking toward the glass panels, watching how the board spoke to me. How they deferred. How they waited for my opinion first. He was pale, like the ground had shifted beneath him. He still didn't know the truth, not fully. But something in him finally broke. The confidence that he understood where people belonged. Later, as I stepped back into the lobby, Tobias moved closer. Not enough to be bold, but enough to listen. Enough to confirm his growing fear. The pianist shifted to a slow jazz arrangement. The entire lodge glowed with warmth and anticipation. And then it happened. A member of the vendor team approached, holding a branded portfolio. "Ms. Grant," he said, "we finalized the investment report you requested. Whenever you're ready, it's in your office." Tobias flinched. "Office? My office?" He swallowed hard, throat tight. I could feel his confusion turning into suspicion. The pieces were connecting, slowly, painfully. He just didn't want to believe them. Because believing them meant admitting he had mocked, belittled, and openly embarrassed someone who stood above him in every possible way. I walked past him, warm breeze from the fireplace brushing against my skin, the faint trill of champagne bubbles rising behind me. He whispered under his breath, "Who is she?" But silence was still my answer. And it terrified him more than any words could. Holiday nights at the lodge always felt enchanted, but tonight carried a different kind of weight. Something electric. Something expectant. By sunset, the entire property glowed like a winter cathedral. Frosted garlands lined the staircases, candles flickered along the marble railings, and the staff moved with that unmistakable pre-event energy. Crisp, efficient, almost reverent. This was the night of our annual Winter Donor Gala. Our most important event of the year. The night the lodge belonged not just to its guests, but to its legacy. I took my time dressing. A silk gown in deep champagne gold. Pearl shoulder accents that glimmered like ice under warm light. A velvet wrap, soft against my skin. The faintest trace of white jasmine perfume. Quiet luxury. The kind that doesn't ask for attention. It receives it. When I stepped into the grand hall, camera flashes clicked softly. Not for me, yet, but for the early donors taking photos beneath the 10-foot champagne tower. The pianist had switched to a slow classical arrangement, keys shimmering like snowfall. And then I saw him. Tobias. In an ill-fitted tux, clutching a drink too tightly, eyes darting around the room like he was searching for belonging. He didn't know he was standing on my event. Not yet. His friend nudged him. "Isn't this that fancy charity thing you always talk about?" "Yeah," Tobias said, forcing a confident laugh. "Big donors. Big money. People who actually matter." He still truly believed that meant him, not me. I moved past them toward the main stage. Staff straightened as I walked by, subtle bows, respectful glances. Tobias noticed every single one and turned rigid, like someone had pressed pause on him. But the moment, the real moment, came when the gala coordinator approached. A tall man in a navy suit, headset in one ear, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Grant," he said warmly, "we're seated and ready. The board is waiting for your opening remarks." Tobias' head whipped around so fast I heard his friend inhale sharply. My name. Spoken with respect. With authority. With familiarity. He blinked as if the syllables were foreign. Then he followed me again, like a shadow refusing to detach. The doors to the ballroom opened. Gasps. Always gasps. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Champagne flutes lined the tables in perfect rows. Snowflake lights danced across the velvet drapes. And every seat, every single one, was filled with people who had come because I had asked. The board sat in the front row. I stepped toward the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas announced from the side of the stage, "please welcome the owner of Wintercrest Lodge and our major endowment director, Ms. Dahlia Grant." Silence broke into thunderous applause. And Tobias. Tobias looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. His eyes widened. His body stilled. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Finally, the truth crashed in. The woman he mocked. The woman he belittled. The woman whose tree he laughed at. On the lodge. On the gala. On the very moment swallowing him whole. I stepped to the microphone. Calm. Warm. Composed. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady. "Wintercrest has always believed in building legacy through quiet generosity. Tonight is about honoring those who help us create spaces where dignity lives." My gaze met Tobias. Not vindictive. Not gloating. Just knowing. He tried to look away. He couldn't. As I continued my speech, the staff he had mocked the day before stood at the walls, watching him crumble in real time. The donors murmured softly, impressed by the elegance, the poise, the control. After the applause, the coordinator guided me off stage. Tobias stepped forward, trembling slightly. "Dahlia," he whispered, voice cracking. You're the owner?" I offered him a polite, faint smile. "The kind you give someone who doesn't deserve more." He stuttered. Why didn't you say anything?" I fixed the velvet wrap over my shoulder. "Some things," I said softly, "don't need to be said. They reveal themselves." He opened his mouth to respond, but there was nothing left for him to say. He had humiliated himself, without any help from me. And the silence around us was the purest form of justice. After the applause faded and the crowd moved toward the ballroom for dinner, the air changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like the soft click of a door closing for good. I stepped down from the stage, the silk hem of my gown whispering against the marble floor. Candlelight flickered along the walls, casting warm gold across the velvet drapes. The pianist shifted into a slower piece, the notes floating like falling snow. This was my favorite moment of the gala. The stillness after the reveal. The hush before the celebration. The quiet power settling into place. And right there, in the hallway lined with crystal sconces, Tobias stood waiting. He looked smaller now. Not physically, but in presence. His confidence had drained like water from cupped hands. "Dahlia," his voice trembled. "Can we talk?" I paused a few feet away. Enough distance to protect my peace. Enough proximity to hear him crumble. He swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me?" His throat tightened. "That this was your lodge?" I kept my voice calm. "Because it didn't matter then." He blinked. "And now," I said softly, "it matters only to you." His breath hitched. He felt the shift, finally. The realization that the person he mocked held more dignity, wealth, and composure than he'd ever touched. "I messed up," he whispered. "I know that now. I shouldn't have laughed at you, or your tree, or acted like you didn't belong here." I let the silence stretch. Silence is powerful. Silence makes the truth echo. He stepped closer, too close, before stopping himself. Do you think we could start over?" My eyes lifted to his. Once, his question might have mattered. But that version of me, the one who flinched under other people's judgments, had melted away like frost under sunrise. "This lodge," I said, "was built on values that don't align with how you treat people." He exhaled shakily. "Dahlia, I'm sorry. Really, I didn't know." "That," I replied, "was the point." He flinched. Guests drifted past us, murmuring about the food, the winter decor, the silent auction. Staff nodded respectfully as they walked by, each Ms. Grant slicing deeper into the truth Tobias was trying to outrun. I turned slightly, my gown catching the chandelier light. "I hope," I said gently, "you learned something tonight." He opened his mouth, but I continued. Power doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't scream. It doesn't belittle. My pearls warmed against my skin, a reminder of every quiet victory that led me here. "It moves silently," I said, "until the moment it doesn't have to." He looked like he might cry. But tears weren't my responsibility. Healing wasn't my burden. And closure didn't require cruelty, only clarity. I stepped back, adjusting the velvet wrap around my shoulders. "I won't embarrass you," I said. "That's never been my style." He nodded slowly, shame settling into his posture. "But consider this your moment," I finished softly. "The moment you realized who you were standing next to, and who you lost the right to stand near." He swallowed, a broken, tiny sound. I walked away. Not quickly, not triumphantly, just peacefully. Each step echoed with dignity across the marble floor. Inside the ballroom, donors greeted me warmly. Champagne glasses sparkled beneath the chandelier, snow fell softly beyond the tall windows, and the entire lodge hummed with celebration, the kind built on legacy, not ego. As I lifted a crystal flute of champagne, the room shimmered around me. That was the true revenge. Not humiliation. Not cruelty. Just a life that continued beautifully without him. A life he could see, but never touch again. I took a slow sip, the bubbles soft against my lips. Closure tasted like champagne. If you've ever been underestimated, or risen quietly from someone's disrespect? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Your voice matters here.